So, it would seem that China has found Huawei around US sanctions, eh? The other shoe has finally dropped, and the narrative has shifted on the world's second largest economy. Following predictions of endless growth and inevitable hegemony, Western journalists have flipped the script and gone all in on the reverse narrative. As per the new conventional wisdom, China is now in decline, potentially on the brink of collapse, a chorus echoed by commentators across Europe and the US, and across the political spectrum. But this is Capital Matters, and we scoff in the face of the conventional narrative. Don't worry, it also scoffs in ours. So let's peek under the hood and examine the mystery of how Huawei went from a casualty of the Great Trade War to the crown jewel of China's tech manufacturing industry, and see how long it can stay that way.
Shall we begin?
In 2019, Huawei was the second largest mobile phone manufacturer and was on track to become the biggest. This ambition was curtailed by the US-China trade war because of concerns over stolen technology, and this was expected to be the axe that felled the Chinese manufacturing giant. But now, it rises. The release of Huawei's Mate 6 Pro, featuring 7nm chips that were supposedly impossible to make due to ongoing US tech sanctions, have highlighted China's continued ability to make technological advances in semiconductor manufacturing at scale, despite increasing pressure from the US. This shocked US commentators and officials, and has interesting implications for tech consumption in China. First, let's talk manufacturing. The story here is all about the chips. These new phones run on a CPU called the Kirin 9000S. The big question is whether or not the Shanghai Manufacturing International Corp essentially copied design protocols from TSMC in order to create the Kirin. And the verdict seems to be no, though some degree of design transfer seems to have occurred for other processes as little as 3 years ago. So to the question, is this actually Chinese design know-how? The answer appears to be yes. Yes, it is, though this is hardly a cause for unrestrained optimism. The real issue here is cost. Achieving this level of sophistication, which is on par with earlier generations of chips produced elsewhere, required much more capital input from Huawei than it did for their competitors. And this brings us to another point. Does Huawei's new techspertise mean it will be able to grab a slice of the apple pie? As of Q2 2023, Huawei is the dominant smartphone provider in China, with about 23% of the market, and Xiaomi, another domestic brand, is the third largest, with 8%. The second, with around 22% of the market, is Apple, making it both Huawei's largest competitor and the largest foreign company in that market. Between the recent announcement that government officials in China would be prevented from using iPhones and the arrival of the Mate 60, not to mention the oft-discussed soggy demand from Chinese consumers, one would expect the launch of the iPhone 15 to have a lukewarm reception in the Chinese market. But no, instead the iPhone 15 is doing incredibly well, selling over 3 million units in pre-sales alone. This presents a massive challenge for the Mate 60, which sold around 1 million units during its launch week, which was nonetheless an improvement over older models. More worrisome still is the fact that the Mate 60's price point is pretty close to that of the iPhone 15, despite the iPhone being viewed as a luxury good. And the iPhone 15 retains a degree of technological sophistication that is for the time being beyond the capacity of anything that SMIC could create domestically. So Huawei may have crossed the first hurdle and proved the point that US sanctions can't put an end to Chinese semiconductor manufacturing. But there's still a long way to go if they want to start eating Apple's share of even the domestic Chinese market. Now, you may be wondering, but Capital Matters, if China's economic crisis is as severe as they say, how is it that Chinese consumers are lining up round the block for the release of the iPhone 15? And to this I say, subscribe to our Substack. We have an in-depth breakdown of Chinese consumer behavior that expands on what we're discussing in this video. Let's be clear about one thing. If anyone is offering you a simple, neatly packaged narrative breakdown of what's going on in China, they are most likely wrong. It is fiendishly difficult to get a full view of what's going on, because we can only ever get a partial view of the information, and the view we get is often biased. On the one hand, the Chinese government frequently omits, modifies, or otherwise doctors its data, meaning that getting trustworthy numbers to work off of often requires multiple outside sources, many of whom are working with unknown factors to come to their conclusions. On the other, journalists get stuff wrong sometimes, and can sometimes be incentivized to simplify or dramatize stories in order to increase audience engagement. Some commentators mislead with statistics in order to better serve their narrative. Others get caught in feedback loops and end up telling the audience what they already expect to hear, specifically because they expect to hear it. But even without the difficulties of seeing past motivated commentators and untrustworthy government data, the question, what's up with China, is quite possibly one of the biggest and most difficult to answer socioeconomic and geopolitical questions of our time, perhaps even of all time thus far. This means that a great deal of detective work is needed, and the information we're presenting is only one small piece of a very, very, very large puzzle. Thanks for watching through to the end. Feel free to like and share this episode if you enjoyed it, and tell us below in the comments, do you think Huawei can climb back up to the top of the mountain? Or will the weight of US sanctions ultimately be too much to bear?